The church bells were still echoing in my ears when Olivia told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding anymore. My own daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone for 20 years, now staring at me with cold eyes that belonged to a stranger. "Mom, I think it's best if you don't come," she said, her voice unnervingly calm as she stirred her latte. "Diane thinks your presence would cause unnecessary tension, and honestly, I agree with her." Just like that, dismissed from the most important day of her life because her future mother-in-law didn't approve of me. What Olivia didn't know was that I had already paid the $45,000 deposit for Westfield Estate, the lakefront mansion she'd dreamed of since she was 16. I'd been silently funding her perfect day, and now I was being told I couldn't even attend. 26 years of bedtime stories, school projects, and midnight fever checks, reduced to unnecessary tension. That was the moment I realized my daughter had become someone I no longer recognized, and perhaps the most painful truth of all. She had never really seen me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was 32 when Olivia was born, my miracle baby after years of trying. Robert and I had almost given up hope when those 2 pink lines appeared on the test. I still remember holding her for the first time, this tiny, perfect human with wisps of dark hair and eyes that seemed to recognize me. "She knows you're her mom," the nurse had said, and in that moment, I made a silent promise that I would give her the world. When Olivia was 6, Robert left us for his 24-year-old secretary. The divorce was messy and painful, but I was determined not to let it affect Olivia's life. I took extra accounting projects, working nights and weekends to maintain our home in Pine Ridge, ensuring Olivia could stay in the same school with her friends. Robert's child support checks became increasingly sporadic as he started a new family with Melissa, and eventually they stopped altogether when he relocated to California. "Why can't I have the new American Girl doll like Jessica?" Olivia would ask, her eyes wide with that innocent childhood longing. I'd smile and tell her, "We're saving for something even more special," even as I calculated how many extra hours I'd need to work to afford it for her birthday. That became our pattern. I would find a way, always, to give Olivia what she needed, and whenever possible, what she wanted too. I remember the night Olivia was accepted to Cornell University. She came running into the kitchen, waving the acceptance letter. "Mom, I got in!" she squealed, throwing her arms around me. I held her tight, my heart swelling with pride, even as my mind raced through the calculations. Ivy League tuition meant liquidating my retirement fund, but seeing the joy on her face, I knew it was worth it. "How are we going to afford this?" she asked later that night, a moment of reality breaking through the excitement. "Don't worry about that," I told her, smoothing her hair like I used to when she was little. "I've been saving for your education since you were born." It wasn't entirely true. I'd been saving, yes, but nowhere near enough. What I didn't tell her was that I would be taking out a second mortgage on our home, or that I would be working 60-hour weeks at Hartman & Associates to make it happen. College years flew by in a blur of tuition payments, care packages, and weekend visits whenever I could afford the trip to Ithaca. While other parents were building their retirement funds, I was building Olivia's future. My colleague Jonathan Hartman noticed the dark circles under my eyes one day and asked if everything was all right. "Just burning the midnight oil," I said with a weak smile. "Eleanor, you've been burning it for years," he replied, his voice kind, but concerned. "At some point, you need to think about yourself, too." I brushed off his concern. "Olivia graduates next year, then I'll slow down." But life rarely goes according to plan. After graduation, Olivia moved to New York City for a marketing internship that paid barely enough to cover her share of a cramped apartment in Brooklyn. "Mom, I can't make rent this month," became a regular call, and each time I would transfer the money, tightening my own budget a little more. You need to start saying no, Ellie, my sister Patty told me over coffee one Sunday. She's an adult. Now. She needs to figure things out on her own. It's just until she gets established, I insisted. The marketing industry is tough to break into. Patty gave me a look I'd come to know well, equal parts concern and exasperation. You've been saying that for 2 years now. When does it end? I didn't have an answer for her then. The truth was, I didn't know how to stop being the person who solved all of Olivia's problems. It had been my identity for so long that I wasn't sure who I would be without it. When Olivia met Brandon Hughes at a charity gala 3 years ago, something shifted. Suddenly, the calls for financial help became less frequent. She was being wined and dined by a handsome finance manager whose family had deep roots in Connecticut society. Brandon came from money. Old money, the kind that didn't need to be flashy because its presence was understood. When Olivia brought him home to Pine Ridge for Thanksgiving, I noticed how she watched him, seeking approval for everything from her outfit to her opinions. Brandon thinks I should switch to corporate marketing, she told me as we washed dishes after dinner. He says there's more growth potential. And what do you think? I asked, passing her a plate to dry. She looked surprised by the question. Well, he would know, wouldn't he? His family has connections everywhere. I bit my tongue. My independent daughter, who had once declared she would never let a man dictate her career, was now eagerly following Brandon's guidance. But she was happy, happier than I'd seen her in years. So I kept my concerns to myself. The engagement came a year later, on a yacht in the Mediterranean that belonged to one of Brandon's father's business associates. Olivia called me at midnight, her voice breathless with excitement. Mom, I'm engaged. Brandon proposed at sunset. The ring is incredible. 3 carats, emerald cut, with diamonds along the band. His mother helped him choose it. I swallowed, the lump in my throat. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you. We're thinking about a spring wedding at Westfield Estate, she continued, not noticing my momentary silence. Diane says she can get us priority booking through her connections. Westfield Estate. I remembered 16-year-old Olivia cutting out a magazine feature about the historic mansion, pinning it to her vision board. When I get married, it's going to be there, she had declared. Now, a decade later, her dream was within reach, not because of my years of sacrifice, but because of the Hughes family's social standing. That sounds perfect, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. Whatever you want, Olivia. The next day, without telling anyone, I drove to Westfield Estate. The venue was everything Olivia had dreamed of. Sweeping lakefront gardens, a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers, and a bridal suite that looked like something from a fairy tale. The booking manager, a polished woman named Vanessa Cooper, explained that they were indeed fully booked for the spring season. But Mrs. Hughes mentioned you might be able to make an exception, I said, repeating what Olivia had told me. Vanessa's smile tightened slightly. Ah, yes, Ms. Hughes has inquired. We do occasionally adjust our schedule for the right circumstances. I understood immediately what she meant. Money talked at places like Westfield Estate. What would those circumstances entail exactly? Our premium package begins at $85,000, she said smoothly, with a non-refundable deposit of $45,000 to secure the date. The figure hit me like a physical blow. It was more than I made in a year at Hartman & Associates. But the image of Olivia's face when she realized her dream venue was secured, that would be priceless. I'll need to think about it, I said, taking the glossy brochure Vanessa handed me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small kitchen, calculator in hand, running the numbers over and over. I had some savings. Not much, but some. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And there was the small inheritance from my mother, which I'd been holding on to for retirement. If I took on more clients and cut back on every non-essential expense, maybe, just maybe, I could make it work. The next morning, I called Jonathan Hartman and asked if I could take on additional accounts. "Eleanor, you're already working more hours than anyone in the firm," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I just have a big expense coming up." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "This is about Olivia's wedding, isn't it?" I didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Take Miller Pharmaceuticals," he finally said. "The account just came in. But Eleanor, promise me you'll be careful. You can't pour from an empty cup forever." I promised, though we both knew it was a promise I was unlikely to keep. I had been running on empty for years, finding reserves of energy and determination I didn't know I possessed, all for Olivia. 3 days later, I returned to Westfield Estate with a cashier's check for $45,000, nearly every penny I had managed to save over the years. Vanessa seemed surprised when I placed it on her desk. "Mrs. Wilson, I thought the Hughes family would be handling this," she said, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the envelope. "It's a gift," I explained, "for my daughter. But I'd appreciate if you didn't mention my involvement just yet. I want it to be a surprise." Vanessa nodded, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Of course. We're quite good at discretion here. At Westfield." As I drove home, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For once, I would be the hero in Olivia's story. Not Brandon, not Diane Hughes with her connections and society friends. Me, Eleanor Wilson, the mother who had worked tirelessly behind the scenes for 26 years to make her daughter's dreams come true. What I didn't realize then was that my grand gesture was about to become the catalyst for the most painful chapter of our relationship. The wedding planning began in earnest the following week. Olivia created a group text with Brandon, Diane, and myself to coordinate details. Almost immediately, it became clear that Diane had appointed herself chief decision-maker. "I've scheduled a tasting with Sophia Rossi's catering company for next Tuesday," Diane wrote. Her Mediterranean menu would be divine for a spring wedding. "Mom, can you make it?" Olivia texted. Before I could respond, Diane chimed in again. "Let's keep the tasting small, darling. Too many opinions can be overwhelming. Why don't you, Brandon and I go, and then we can fill your mother in afterward?" I stared at my phone, hurt blooming in my chest. This was the beginning of a pattern that would continue for weeks. Dress shopping? "Eleanor, the boutique is quite small, and Jessica is already joining as maid of honor." "Florist appointment? We've already narrowed down the options. No need to drag your mother across town." "Venue tour?" "Actually, there's been a change of plans. We've secured Westfield Estate through my connections." I bit my tongue when I read that last message, resisting the urge to reveal that the venue had been secured through my bank account, not Diane's social network. But I stayed silent, telling myself that this was Olivia's special time, and I wouldn't do anything to create tension. But tensions rose nonetheless when the discussion turned to the guest list. Diane had submitted a list of over 150 names, business associates, social connections, distant relatives, people Olivia had never even met. "Don't you think we should prioritize people who actually know and care about Olivia?" I ventured during a rare planning lunch where I was included. Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Eleanor, a wedding of this caliber is as much about social connections as it is about celebration. Brandon's father and I have a certain standing in the community to maintain." "But, Mom," Olivia cut in, her voice tight, "Diane knows what she's doing. These people are going to be part of my life now." I fell silent, pushing my salad around on my plate. When had my daughter started prioritizing social standing over genuine relationships? And when had she started calling me Mom in that clipped, dismissive tone that made me feel like an inconvenience rather than a parent? the final straw came, 6 weeks before the wedding. Olivia had asked me to meet her at the Morning Brew, our favorite local coffee shop. I arrived early, ordering her usual vanilla latte and finding a quiet corner table. When she walked in, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. Her shoulders were tense, her smile forced. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked as she slid into the seat across from me. She took a deep breath, wrapping her hands around the coffee mug I'd placed in front of her. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding." My heart skipped a beat. "Is something wrong with the venue? The date?" "No, nothing like that." She paused, avoiding my eyes. "It's about the arrangements." "What arrangements?" "Diane thinks—" She started, then corrected herself. "We think it might be best if you attended as a regular guest, rather than being announced as mother of the bride." I felt as though I'd been slapped. "What?" "It's just that. Greg will be walking me down the aisle, and it might seem odd to highlight you during the reception when Robert isn't there. Diane thinks it could create an awkward dynamic, especially with so many of their colleagues attending." "Olivia," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your father hasn't been in your life for 20 years. He didn't put you through college. He didn't hold your hand through every heartbreak, every triumph. I did. I'm your parent. Your only real parent." "That's not fair," she said, her eyes flashing. "Dad sends birthday cards. He calls on Christmas." A hollow laugh escaped me. "Birthday cards? That's your standard for parenting?" "This isn't about Dad," she said defensively. "It's about creating the right impression for Brandon's family and their circle. Diane says..." "Diane says... Diane?" "Thinks. Diane believes," I interrupted, unable to contain my frustration any longer. "When did Diane Hughes become the authority on your life, Olivia? On our family?" Her cheeks flushed. "She's just trying to help make my wedding perfect." "And I'm not?" The hurt in my voice was palpable. "Olivia, I've spent my entire adult life trying to give you everything you needed, everything you wanted. I worked 60-hour weeks to put you through Cornell. I've supported every dream, every ambition, even when it meant putting my own life on hold." "Here we go," she muttered, rolling her eyes. The martyr speech. Her words cut deep, deeper than she could possibly know. "Is that what you think of me? That I'm playing martyr by reminding you of our relationship, our history?" "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. It's one day, one tradition. Can't you just go along with it for me?" "One day that symbolizes the erasure of 26 years, I said quietly. "One tradition that relegates me to the background of your life, as if all those years of sacrifice meant nothing." Olivia's expression hardened. "If you're going to make my wedding about you and your feelings, then maybe." She trailed off, but her unspoken words hung in the air between us. "Maybe what?" I prompted, a cold dread settling in my stomach. She met my eyes, and for a second, I saw uncertainty flicker there before it was replaced by resolve. "Maybe it would be better if you didn't come at all." The world seemed to stop. "You don't mean that." "I do," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Mom, I think it's best if you don't come to the wedding. Diane thinks your presence would cause unnecessary tension, and honestly, I agree with her." I sat in stunned silence, the chatter of the coffee shop fading to a distant hum. My daughter, my only child, the person I had centered my entire life around, was banning me from her wedding. And not because of any terrible thing I had done, but because I didn't fit the image Diane Hughes wanted to project. "Olivia," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you have any idea how much that would hurt me?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable, but her resolve didn't waver. "It's my wedding day, Mom. It should be exactly how I want it, how we want it." We, Not Olivia and me. Olivia and the Hughes family. In that moment, I realized I had lost her. Not suddenly, but gradually, over months of planning and years of her seeking approval from people who valued status over substance. "I see," I said, gathering my purse. My hands were trembling. "If that's truly what you want, I won't attend." Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by a flash of guilt. "Thank you for understanding, Mom. I promise we'll celebrate together. Another time." I stood up, feeling suddenly old and very tired. "Enjoy your perfect day, Olivia. I hope it's everything you and Diane have planned." As I walked out of the morning brew, tears blurring my vision, I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done weeks earlier. I called Westfield Estate. "This is Eleanor Wilson," I said when Vanessa Cooper answered. "I need to cancel a wedding booking." I sat in my car outside Westfield Estate for nearly an hour after making the call, rain pattering against the windshield, mirroring the tears streaming down my face. Vanessa Cooper had been surprisingly understanding when I explained the situation. "Mrs. Wilson, I can process the cancellation, but I should remind you that the deposit is non-refundable," she'd said, her voice gentle with sympathy. "I'm aware," I'd replied, my voice hollow. $45,000 gone in an instant, the equivalent of 18 months of mortgage payments, almost a decade of careful saving. All of it vanished with a single phone call. But what was money compared to the realization that I'd become irrelevant in my own daughter's life? That after 26 years of putting her needs first, I'd been discarded so easily, deemed an embarrassment by a woman who'd known Olivia for barely 3 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Patty. "How did coffee with Olivia go?" I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I explain to my sister that my only child had just severed our relationship as casually as declining an unwanted side dish at a restaurant? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the numbness had given way to a dull, throbbing ache in my chest. The modest colonial house that had been our home since Olivia was in kindergarten suddenly felt like a museum of memories that no longer mattered. Photos of her lined the hallway. Gap-toothed grins in elementary school, awkward teenage years with braces, graduation caps, and wide, hopeful smiles. I'd given up everything for those smiles. I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet. Above the refrigerator, reaching for the bottle of whiskey I kept for special occasions. This wasn't a celebration, but it certainly felt momentous. The day I finally understood that the life I'd built around my daughter's happiness had been a house of cards, ready to collapse at the first strong wind. 2 glasses in, my phone rang. It was Jonathan Hartman. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Eleanor? Are you all right? You missed the Miller meeting this afternoon." The meeting. In the shock of Olivia's revelation, I'd completely forgotten. "Jonathan, I'm so sorry. Something came up." He was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, I've known you for 15 years. You've never missed a meeting, not even when you had pneumonia and could barely stand. What's going on?" And just like that, the dam broke. I told him everything: the secret venue payment, Diane Hughes's systematic exclusion of me from wedding planning, and finally, Olivia's devastating request that I not attend at all. The words tumbled out between sobs that I couldn't control. Years of suppressed hurt finding release. "So I canceled it," I finished, my voice ragged. "I canceled the venue booking." "Good for you," Jonathan said firmly, surprising me. "It's about time you stood up for yourself, Eleanor." "But I've lost her," I whispered. "My only child." "You didn't lose her today," he said gently. "From what you've told me, this has been happening for months, years, maybe. You just finally acknowledged it." His words stung with their truth. I'd been watching Olivia slip away since she met Brandon, each phone call becoming shorter, each visit home more rushed. I'd told myself it was natural. She was building her own life, establishing her career. but deep down, I'd known something fundamental was changing. The daughter who once called me for advice on everything from career moves to relationship troubles now consulted Diane Hughes instead, adopting her values, her preferences, even her dismissive tone. "What do I do now?" I asked, more to myself than to Jonathan. "Now," he said firmly, "you start living for Eleanor Wilson." The next morning brought the first explosive consequence of my decision. My phone woke me at 6:17 a.m., Olivia's name flashing on the screen. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Perhaps she'd reconsidered. Perhaps she'd realized the enormity of what she'd done. I answered, my voice still rough with sleep. "Olivia? What the hell did you do?" Her voice was sharp, strident, with anger. The hope withered as quickly as it had bloomed. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Mom. Westfield Estate called. They said you canceled our wedding booking. Why would you do something so vindictive?" I sat up in bed, pushing hair from my face. "Vindictive?" "Olivia, you banned me from attending. What did you expect me to do?" "What are you talking about? What does you not coming have to do with canceling our venue?" I closed my eyes, realization dawning. "They didn't tell you, did they? Diane and her connections didn't secure that venue, Olivia." "I did. I paid the $45,000 deposit. Every penny of it." Silence stretched between us, heavy with shock. That's not possible," she finally stammered. "Diane said—" "Diane lied?" I cut in, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I've paid for everything in your life, Olivia. Your education, your rent when you couldn't make it in New York, and yes, your dream wedding venue. The venue you've now lost because you decided I wasn't good enough to attend. You paid for Westfield?" Her voice had lost its edge, confusion replacing anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would it have made a difference?" I asked quietly. "Or would you still have chosen Diane's approval over my feelings?" More silence. Then, in a smaller voice, "We can fix this, right? You can call them back, explain it was a misunderstanding?" Of course. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. Just concern for the venue, for the perfect day that was slipping away. I felt something harden inside me, a protective shell forming around my wounded heart. "No, Olivia, I can't fix this. The deposit is non-refundable, and they've already booked another wedding for your date. But the invitations are already out. Everyone is expecting Westfield. Mom, you have to do something." "I already did something," I replied, my voice cool and distant. "I spent 26 years putting you first. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you opportunities I never had. I emptied my savings to book your dream venue. And in return, you decided I didn't deserve to see you walk down the aisle. There's nothing left for me to do." "So that's it?" Her voice cracked. "You're punishing me because I hurt your feelings?" "No, Olivia. I'm finally recognizing that I deserve better than to be treated as an afterthought by my own daughter. If you and the Hughes family want a perfect wedding at Westfield Estate, then let them pay for it." "They can't," she cried, panic edging into her voice. "Brandon's parents are counting on us to handle the venue. They're already paying for the honeymoon and—" I cut her off. "That's not my problem anymore. You made your choice, Olivia. Now you get to live with the consequences." I ended the call before she could respond, my hands trembling but my resolve firm. Within minutes, the phone began ringing again, Olivia calling back, then Brandon. Then numbers I didn't recognize that I assumed belonged to members of the Hughes family. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. For the first time in over 2 decades, I called in sick to work. I needed time to process, to think, to breathe in a life that suddenly had no center. I made coffee and walked through my quiet house, really seeing it for perhaps the first time in years. The faded curtains that needed replacing, the dated wallpaper. In the hallway, the creaking step on the staircase I'd been meaning to fix. I'd put everything off, channeling every spare dollar into Olivia's future. By mid-morning, a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I peered through the peephole to see Diane Hughes standing on my porch, her Mercedes gleaming in my driveway. I considered not answering, but a strange calm had settled over me. I was done hiding, done acquiescing, done making myself small to accommodate others. I opened the door, saying nothing, simply waiting for her to speak. Diane wore an expression that attempted concern but couldn't quite hide her condescension. "Eleanor," she began, "we need to talk about this situation." "Please come in," I said, stepping aside with exaggerated politeness. She entered my home like someone visiting a slightly distasteful museum, her eyes flicking over my modest furnishings. I led her to the living room and gestured to the sofa, but remained standing myself. "Eleanor, I understand you're upset about the wedding arrangements," she began, smoothing her expensive slacks. "But canceling the venue is simply unacceptable. Do you have any idea how this makes our families look? The embarrassment Olivia and Brandon are facing?" "Funny," I replied. "I was just thinking about embarrassment. The kind a mother feels when her daughter tells her she's not welcome at her wedding." Diane had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before rallying. "These situations are delicate. We were trying to create a certain atmosphere, a cohesive family narrative. By erasing me from it," I finished for her. "No one was erasing you," she said, her tone patronizing. "We were simply curating the event for optimal elegance." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Optimal elegance. Is that what you call cutting out the woman who raised Olivia single-handedly? The woman who worked 60-hour weeks to put her through an Ivy League education? The woman who paid for the very venue you're now upset about losing? Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Let's be clear, Eleanor. You chose to make that payment without consulting anyone. No one asked you to do that. Just like no one asked me to raise my daughter after her father abandoned us." I shook my head. "You're right, Diane. No one asked. I did it because that's what love looks like. Showing up, sacrificing, giving without being asked. But I've finally realized that love shouldn't be a one-way street." Diane crossed her legs, her demeanor shifting to businesslike efficiency. "Let's put feelings aside and be practical. What will it take to fix this? Is it about money? Because I'm sure we can come to some arrangement." The casual dismissal of my feelings as irrelevant, the implication that my pain could be bought off, it crystallized everything wrong with the dynamic that had been building since Olivia met Brandon. "It was never about money," I said quietly. "It was about respect, recognition, basic human decency. But you wouldn't understand that, would you, Diane? Because in your world, people like me are just props to be arranged or removed as needed." She stood, clearly done with the conversation. "I see we're not going to reach a reasonable solution today. But understand this, Eleanor. Actions have consequences. Olivia is devastated, and this vindictive behavior will only push her further away." "She was already gone," I said, the truth of it settling heavily in my chest. "You made sure of that." Diane moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "If you change your mind, if you decide you want to repair this relationship, you know how to reach us." After she left, I sank onto the sofa, exhaustion washing over me. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Patty. "Olivia just called me in hysterics. What's going on?" I texted back, "Can you come over? I need someone on my side right now." 30 minutes later, Patty was at my door with a bottle of wine and a fierce, protective expression. I told her everything, watching her face shift from confusion to outrage as the story unfolded. "They told you not to come to the wedding?" she repeated, incredulous. "After everything you've done? And now they're angry because you canceled the venue you paid for?" I nodded, oddly comforted by her indignation. Am I wrong, Patty? Am I being petty or vindictive like they're saying? Absolutely not, she declared, pouring us each a generous glass of wine. Eleanor, you've spent your entire adult life being a doormat for that girl. You've given up your own dreams, your retirement, security, everything, and this is how she repays you? By letting some society climber convince her you're not good enough to be acknowledged as her mother? Hearing Patty say it so bluntly was both painful and liberating. I'd been so consumed with self-doubt, so worried about my own reaction that I hadn't fully processed the magnitude of Olivia's betrayal. "Olivia called you?" I asked, taking a sip of wine. Patty nodded grimly, crying about how you'd ruined everything, how she might have to cancel the wedding, how embarrassed she was. Not one word about how she'd hurt you, not one acknowledgement that banning her own mother from her wedding was cruel and unusual punishment. She said I was punishing her for hurting my feelings, I said, staring into my wine glass. Like my feelings were trivial, an inconvenience to her perfect day. "And that right there," Patty said, pointing at me with her free hand, "is the problem. Your feelings have always been secondary to hers. You've taught her that your job is to give, and her job is to take. And now she's shocked that you've finally drawn a line." I felt tears welling again. I always thought I was doing the right thing, being selfless, putting her needs first. Isn't that what a good mother does? Patty set down her glass and took my hand. A good mother teaches her child to be considerate, grateful, and kind. You did everything for Olivia except require her to think about someone besides herself. Her words were harsh but rang with uncomfortable truth. Had I enabled this? Had my constant sacrifice, my willingness to put myself last, contributed to Olivia's ability to discard me so easily? "I don't know who she is anymore, Patty," I whispered. "The Olivia I raised would never have treated anyone this way, let alone her own mother." "People show you who they are when it costs them something," Patty said softly. "When it was easy to love you, when you were solving her problems, paying her bills, supporting her dreams, Olivia was happy to have you around. But the minute your presence became inconvenient to her social climbing, you became expendable." I winced at her bluntness, but couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. "So what do I do now?" "Now," Patty said, refilling our glasses, "you start rebuilding your life without Olivia at the center of it. You focus on Eleanor, what she needs, what she wants, what will make her happy. And if Olivia ever decides to grow up and recognize what she's thrown away, you can decide then whether to let her back in." That night, after Patty left, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, doing something I hadn't done in decades, making a list of my own dreams, my own goals. What did I want for the years ahead? Who was Eleanor Wilson when she wasn't defined by motherhood? The list started slowly. Practical things like repainting the living room, fixing the creaky stair, updating my wardrobe. But as I continued writing, deeper desires emerged. Travel to Europe, learn to play piano, take art classes, move to a cottage by the sea, retire early. I looked at the final item, circling it with my pen. Early retirement had seemed impossible just days ago, when I was still mentally setting aside funds for Olivia's needs. But now? If I cut back on expenses, took on a few more clients in the short term, and most importantly, stopped functioning as Olivia's financial safety net, it might be possible within 5 years. For the first time since the confrontation at the Morning Brew, I felt a flutter of something like hope. There was life after Olivia. There was the possibility of joy that didn't revolve around her accomplishments, her happiness, her needs. The next morning, my resolve was tested again. Michael, my son, called early. Unlike Olivia, Michael had been largely self-sufficient since graduating from state college. He'd become a high school history teacher, married his college sweetheart, and settled in a neighboring town. We were close in a comfortable, low-maintenance way. Sunday dinners once a month, phone calls on birthdays and holidays, the occasional text message about something that made him think of me. "Mom, what's going on with Olivia?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "She called Katie last night, completely hysterical about the wedding venue." Katie was Michael's wife, a sweet, practical woman who taught kindergarten. She and Olivia had never been particularly close, which made the call even more unusual. "It's a long story," I sighed. "The short version is that Olivia told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding, so I canceled the venue I had paid for." A low whistle came through the phone. "You paid for Westfield Estate? That place costs a fortune." $45,000 for the deposit alone, I confirmed. Nearly every penny I had saved. "Jesus, Mom." Michael sounded genuinely shocked. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm an idiot," I said with a rueful laugh. "Because I thought I could buy my way into being treated with basic respect by my own daughter." Michael was quiet for a moment. "She told Katie you did it out of spite because you were jealous of Brandon's family." A fresh wave of hurt washed over me. Of course she did. Heaven forbid she take responsibility for her actions. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "you know Olivia's always been dramatic. She gets it from Dad. Maybe if you just talked to her, explained that you were hurt." "I did explain," I cut in. "She didn't care. She was only concerned about finding a new venue and how embarrassed she'd be in front of Brandon's family and friends." Another pause. "That sounds like Olivia," he finally admitted. "She's always been self-focused. But cutting you out of the wedding completely? That seems extreme, even for her." "It wasn't just her," I explained. "It was Diane Hughes, Brandon's mother. She's been systematically pushing me out of every decision, every event, for months. And Olivia has let her do it." "What does Brandon say about all this?" Michael asked. I realized I had no idea. In all the months of planning, all the group texts and awkward meetings, Brandon had been a silent, compliant figure in the background. "I don't think he says anything. He just goes along with whatever his mother and Olivia want." "Sounds like a great foundation for marriage," Michael said dryly. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of maternal protectiveness. "It's not our place to judge their relationship, Michael." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But it is our place to call out cruelty when we see it. And what Olivia's doing to you is cruel, Mom. Plain and simple." His support brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that. I've been feeling like I'm losing my mind, like maybe I really am being vindictive or selfish." "You're the least selfish person I know," Michael said firmly. "You've done nothing but give since Dad left. Maybe it's time you started taking for yourself." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table again, adding to my list of dreams and goals. I wrote, "Visit Michael and Katie more often," near the top. It was time to nurture the relationships that nurtured me in return. By midday, my phone had finally stopped its constant buzzing with calls and texts from Olivia and various members of the Hughes family. The silence was both a relief and a new kind of pain. Had they given up so quickly? Was I that easily discarded, that readily replaced? I was contemplating this when my doorbell rang. Steeling myself for another confrontation, I opened it to find my neighbor Ruth Simmons standing on the porch with a casserole dish in her weathered hands. "Thought you might need some comfort food," she said simply. "Word travels fast in Pine." "Ridge, and I heard your girl's been causing you heartache." I blinked in surprise. Ruth and I had been neighbors for 15 years, exchanging pleasantries over the fence, collecting each other's mail during vacations, but never sharing anything deeply personal. "That's very kind of you," I managed, accepting the dish. "Would you like to come in?" Ruth nodded, following me into the kitchen. As I made tea, she settled at the table, her keen eyes taking in the legal pad with my list still visible. "Plans for the future?" she asked, nodding toward the paper. I hesitated, then nodded, trying to figure out who I am now that Olivia doesn't need me anymore. Ruth smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. Ah, the great reckoning of motherhood. I went through it myself when my boys grew up and forgot they had a mother except when they needed babysitting or money. "How did you handle it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Badly, at first," she admitted with a chuckle. "Cried for weeks. Called them constantly. Tried to make myself indispensable. Then one day my husband, God rest his soul, said something I'll never forget. He said, 'Ruth, you spent 20 years making sure those boys could live without you. Why are you surprised that they can?' The simple wisdom of it struck me like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what I'd done? Worked myself to exhaustion to ensure Olivia could stand on her own 2 feet, could pursue her dreams, could build a life of her own. And now that she was doing exactly that, albeit in a way that hurt me deeply, I was devastated. "It's not that she can live without me," I said slowly. "It's how easily she discarded me, how willingly she let someone else dictate my role, in her life, in her special day." Ruth nodded, accepting the tea I placed before her. "And that's a legitimate hurt, Eleanor. I'm not saying it isn't. What I am saying is that this moment, this painful, terrible moment, is also an opportunity. A chance to rediscover the woman who got buried under Olivia's mom all those years ago." I glanced at my list on the table, feeling a flutter of recognition. "I've been thinking about that, about what I want for myself now." "Good," Ruth said firmly. "Because let me tell you something I've learned in my 70 years on this earth. Children will break your heart. They'll disappoint you. They'll make choices you don't understand. They'll take you for granted. But the only person guaranteed to be with you for the rest of your life is you. Best start making friends with her now." As Ruth left an hour later, casserole consumed and teacups emptied, I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and throbbing like an exposed nerve. But alongside it, tentative and fragile, was a sense of possibility. I picked up my phone and called Jonathan Hartman. "Eleanor," he answered, relief evident in his voice. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I admitted. "But I've also been thinking. Remember that conversation we had a few years ago about me becoming a partner at the firm?" "Of course," he said, surprise coloring his tone. "You declined because you said you needed more flexibility for Olivia." "I'm reconsidering," I said, a strange lightness spreading through me as I spoke. The words, "If the offer's still open, I'd like to discuss it." "Well," Jonathan said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "It's about damn time, Eleanor. Come in tomorrow and we'll talk details." As I hung up, I looked at my list of dreams one more time, then added a new item at the top. Become partner. At Hartman & Associates. For so long, I'd limited my own ambitions, constrained my own potential, all in service to Olivia's needs and dreams. No more. The painful revelations of the past 48 hours had torn away a veil I hadn't even known was there, forcing me to confront truths I'd been avoiding for years. Olivia's cruel dismissal of me from her wedding wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the culmination of a pattern that had been building since she was a teenager, and my willingness to cancel the venue, to finally stand up for myself even at significant financial cost, wasn't just about this single instance of disrespect. It was about reclaiming my worth after decades of allowing it to be diminished. As I sat in my quiet kitchen, a strange calm settled over me. The storm of hurt and anger hadn't passed, not entirely, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. My life had been upended. My relationship with my daughter fractured perhaps beyond repair, but I was still here, still Eleanor Wilson. Still capable of creating a life worth living, with or without Olivia's presence in it. Later that evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone pinged with a text message. It was from Olivia, the first direct communication since our confrontational call that morning. "We found another venue, the Pines Resort. Not as nice as Westfield, but it will do. I hope you're satisfied." No apology. No acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. No recognition of the sacrifice I'd made in booking Westfield in the first place. Just bitter accusation wrapped in the thinnest veneer of information. I stared at the message for a long moment, fingers hovering over the keyboard. A week ago, I would have responded with reassurance, with apology, with attempts to smooth things over. But that Eleanor Wilson was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood her own value. I set the phone aside without responding and turned out the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to reclaim pieces of myself that had been sacrificed on the altar of maternal devotion. And for the first time in 26 years, I was ready to face those challenges not as Olivia's mother, but as Eleanor Wilson, a woman with her own dreams, her own boundaries, and her own path forward. The following day, I arrived at Hartman and Associates an hour earlier than usual. The office was quiet, morning sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. I found comfort in this familiar space, the gentle hum of computers starting up, the scent of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen area, the orderly arrangement of files and folders that had been my professional life for 15 years. I settled at my desk, organizing the day's tasks with a focus I hadn't felt in months. When Jonathan arrived at 8, I was already deep into reviewing the Miller Pharmaceuticals quarterly projections. "You're here early," he remarked, leaning against my doorframe, "and you look different." I glanced up, surprised. Different? How? He studied me for a moment. Determined, present, like you're actually here instead of mentally juggling Olivia's latest crisis. I hadn't realized my preoccupation with Olivia's life had been so obvious to others. "I've made some decisions," I told him, straightening the papers on my desk. "About my future. About what I want." Jonathan smiled, genuine warmth in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear it. My office in 30 minutes to discuss the partnership?" I nodded, feeling a flutter of excitement that had nothing to do with maternal duty or obligation. This was for me, my career, my achievement, my future. The partnership discussion was straightforward. Jonathan had been wanting to reduce his workload for years, gradually transitioning toward retirement. As the firm's most senior accountant, I was the natural choice to step into a leadership role. We discussed terms, profit sharing, new responsibilities, and a timeline for announcement and transition. "You'll need to take on more client development," Jonathan cautioned. "More networking, more visibility in the business community. Are you ready for that?" In the past, I would have hesitated. Social events meant time away from home, from being available for Olivia. But now? "Absolutely," I said, feeling a surge of confidence. "I think it's time Pine Ridge saw more of Eleanor Wilson." By lunchtime, we had hammered out the basic framework of our agreement. I would become a junior partner effective the 1st of next month, with a clear path to senior partnership within 2 years as Jonathan scaled back. My salary would increase by 30% immediately, with performance-based bonuses and profit sharing to follow. As I walked back to my office carrying a fresh cup of coffee and the draft partnership agreement, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered cautiously. "Eleanor Wilson speaking." "Mrs. Wilson, this is Reverend Caldwell from First Presbyterian." The warm, measured voice of Pine Ridge's most prominent minister was instantly recognizable. "I hope I'm not interrupting your workday?" "Not at all, Reverend. What can I do for you?" I settled into my chair, curious about this unexpected call. "Well," he began, clearly choosing his words carefully. I received a rather unusual request from the Hughes family yesterday. They've asked me to reach out to you regarding Olivia's wedding. Apparently, there's been some tension. I almost laughed at the understatement. That's one way to put it. They seem to think I might be able to mediate, perhaps help resolve the situation before the wedding date. Mrs. Hughes was particularly insistent. Of course she was. Diane wouldn't want the uncomfortable task of explaining to her social circle why the wedding had been downgraded from Westfield Estate to the Pines Resort. Better to pressure me into compliance through a respected community figure. I appreciate your call, Reverend, I said, keeping my tone respectful but firm. But I'm afraid this isn't a situation that can be resolved through mediation. My daughter made it clear that I'm not welcome at her wedding, and I've accepted her decision. Not welcome? Genuine surprise colored his voice. That wasn't mentioned. In our conversation, I was given the impression this was about a venue change. The venue change was a consequence, not the cause, I explained. Olivia informed me that my presence would create unnecessary tension at her wedding, so I canceled the venue I had privately paid for. A long pause followed. I see, he finally said, his tone notably different. That puts things in a rather different light. I imagine the Hughes family presented a more favorable version of events, I said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. They suggested you were being difficult about Olivia's happiness, he admitted. Mrs. Hughes was quite emphatic about your supposed jealousy of their family. The accusation stung, even coming secondhand. Reverend, I've spent my entire adult life prioritizing Olivia's happiness, often at significant cost to my own. What I cannot and will not accept is being erased from her life to satisfy someone else's vision of social propriety. I understand, he said softly. And, for what it's worth, Mrs. Wilson, I've known you for many years through your volunteer work with the church's tax assistance program. You've always struck me as a person of integrity and generosity. If you say you were asked not to attend your daughter's wedding, I believe you. His simple statement of support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know. Is there anything the church can do to support you during this difficult time? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. I considered his offer. Actually, yes. I've been thinking about getting more involved in community service. Perhaps you could let me know if any of the church's outreach programs need volunteers. Absolutely, he replied, sounding pleased. We're actually expanding our financial literacy program for single parents. Someone with your expertise would be a tremendous asset. That sounds perfect, I said, feeling another piece of my new life falling into place. Please send me the details. After we said our goodbyes, I sat for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. Not only had I declined to be manipulated by the Hughes family's attempt to use the church against me, but I'd turned the situation into an opportunity for positive change in my life. The realization brought a smile to my face. The rest of the day passed in a productive blur. I delegated tasks I'd previously insisted on handling personally, organized my files for the transition to partnership, and even left the office at a reasonable hour. As I drove home, I made a spontaneous decision to stop at the small art supply store downtown, Pine Ridge Creative Corner. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The shop smelled of paint and possibilities, shelves lined with canvases, brushes, and every color imaginable. I wandered the aisles, trailing my fingers over sketch pads and charcoals, feeling like a child in a candy store. Can I help you find something? The shop owner, Amber Chen, appeared beside me with a friendly smile. I'd seen her around town, but never properly met her. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. I used to paint, years ago before. Well, before life got in the way. I thought I might start again. Amber's eyes lit up. That's wonderful. Beginning artists often start with, "Oh, I'm not a beginner," I found myself saying, surprised by my own certainty. "Just rusty. Very rusty." She laughed, warm and genuine. "Rusty is fixable. What medium did you work in before?" "Watercolors mainly. Sometimes acrylics for larger pieces." "We have a fantastic selection of both, and—" She hesitated, then continued. "We also have weekly classes for returning artists, Tuesday evenings, very casual, very supportive group." I felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of sharing my fledgling efforts with strangers, but pushed through it. "That sounds perfect, actually. When's the next session?" "Tonight, if you're feeling brave," she grinned. 7 to 9. I checked my watch. Just enough time to go home, change, and come back. "Sign me up," I said, surprising myself again with my decisiveness. "And I'll need supplies." An hour later, I returned to Pine Ridge Creative Corner with damp hair and comfortable clothes, a sense of nervous anticipation bubbling in my chest. The shop had been transformed, tables arranged in a circle, easels set up at each station. About a dozen people milled about, chatting and preparing their materials. "Eleanor, you made it!" Amber waved me over. "Everyone, this is Eleanor Wilson. She's rejoining the art world after a hiatus." Warm greetings surrounded me as I took an empty seat, arranging my new supplies with careful attention. A woman about my age settled next to me, extending her hand. "Carolyn Delaney," she introduced herself. "Interior designer and terrible painter. But I keep trying anyway. What brings you to our little group?" I considered my answer. "Life changes," I said finally. "I'm rediscovering parts of myself that got set aside for too long." Carolyn nodded knowingly. "Divorce? Empty nest? Career shift?" "All of the above, in a manner of speaking," I smiled. "Plus a canceled wedding I was paying for but got uninvited. From—" Her eyes widened. "Now that sounds like a story worth hearing over wine after class." And just like that, my first potential new friendship was forming. A connection based not on my identity as Olivia's mother, but on who I was as a person in my own right. The class itself was both humbling and exhilarating. My hands remembered, more than I expected, muscle memory guiding the brush in confident strokes. The watercolor landscape that emerged wasn't gallery-worthy, but it held promise, hints of the artist I had once been and might become again. True to her word, Carolyn insisted we continue our conversation at the lakeside bistro after class. Over glasses of Merlot, I found myself telling her the whole story, the years of sacrifice, Olivia's transformation under the Hughes family's influence, the wedding venue debacle, and my nascent steps toward reclaiming my life. "Good for you," Carolyn said firmly when I finished, raising her glass in a toast. "To boundaries and new beginnings." "To boundaries and new beginnings?" I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I work with a lot of wealthy clients in this area, including several who've held events at both Westfield and the Pines. Between us, the Pines is actually the more prestigious venue now. Westfield has been resting on its reputation for years, while the Pines just completed a multi-million-dollar renovation. Their new lake pavilion is absolutely stunning." I smiled, appreciating her attempt to make me feel better. "That's kind of you to say, but I know how much Olivia wanted Westfield. She had her heart set on it since she was a teenager." Carolyn shrugged. "Then perhaps this is a good lesson for her. We don't always get what we want, especially when we treat people poorly." She took another sip of wine. "You mentioned you're becoming partner at your firm. We should celebrate properly. A few of us are going to the women's networking event at the Chamber of Commerce next week. You should join us." The old Eleanor would have declined immediately, citing work or some obligation related to Olivia. But the woman sitting in the lakeside bistro, with paint still under her fingernails and a sense of new possibilities unfurling before her, simply smiled and said, I'd love to. When I arrived home that night, it was past 11, later than I'd stayed out in years. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Olivia and a text message that simply read, "We need to talk about the wedding. Call me." For the first time in my adult life, I chose not to respond to my daughter's summons. Instead, I set my painting carefully on the dining room table to dry, took a long shower, and went to bed with a new novel I'd been wanting to read for months. Whatever Olivia wanted could wait until morning. I woke the next day feeling rested and surprisingly peaceful. My phone showed 2 more missed calls from Olivia, increasing in urgency, but I deliberately set it aside as I prepared for work. Today was about me, my career, my future, my choices. At the office, I dove into preparation for the partnership announcement. Jonathan and I had agreed to make it official at the monthly staff meeting the following week, but there was much to organize before then. I was deep in concentration when my assistant buzzed to let me know I had a visitor. "Olivia's here to see you," she said, sounding uncertain. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." I took a deep breath, centering myself. This confrontation was inevitable, but at least it would happen on my territory, in a place where I felt confident and in control. "Send her in, please." Olivia swept into my office looking immaculate as always. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. But the confident facade cracked as soon as the door closed behind her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture rigid with tension. "You didn't answer my calls," she accused without preamble. "I was busy," I replied calmly, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit down." She remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "Too busy for your own daughter? Is that how it's going to be now?" The irony of her indignation wasn't lost on me. "Olivia, you made it very clear that my role in your life is no longer a priority. I'm simply respecting your wishes and focusing on my own priorities now. By ignoring me? By canceling my wedding venue and then ghosting me?" I folded my hands on my desk, maintaining my composure. "I didn't cancel your wedding, just the venue I was personally funding. And I haven't been ghosting you. I've been living my life, just as you've been living yours." She paced the small office, agitation evident in every movement. "Everything's a mess, Mom. The Pines Resort is nice, but it's not Westfield. The invitations had to be redone. We lost our deposit with the florist because the arrangements won't work in the new space, and Diane is furious because some society event is happening the same weekend, and now half her friends have conflicts." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was. Despite everything, I took no joy in Olivia's distress. "But these are the natural consequences of the choice you made when you decided I wasn't welcome at your wedding." She stopped pacing, turning, to face me with tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it, Olivia? Because I think it's best if you don't come seems pretty unambiguous to me." She sank into the chair, suddenly looking very young and lost. "I just wanted everything to be perfect. Diane said having you prominently featured would remind everyone that we're not, that we don't come from the right social background," I supplied, when she couldn't finish. "That we're not wealthy enough, connected enough, sophisticated enough for the Hughes family circle?" She didn't deny it, which hurt more than any angry retort would have. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Brandon's family has expectations. His mother has been planning this wedding in her head since he was born." "And what about your mother, Olivia? The woman who raised you? What consideration did my expectations receive?" She looked down at her hands. "I know you're hurt." "Hurt doesn't begin to cover it," I interrupted, my calm facade cracking slightly. "I was devastated. I still am. Not just because you excluded me from your wedding, but because you so casually dismissed 26 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion. Because you were so willing to erase me to please people who judge your worth by your pedigree rather than your character. Tears spilled down her cheeks, smudging her perfect makeup. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to belong with them, to be accepted. Her words broke my heart all over again, not just for myself, but for her. What kind of future was she creating, tying herself to people who made her feel she had to deny her own mother to be worthy of their acceptance? Olivia, I said gently, if they only accept you when you deny fundamental parts of yourself and your history, is that really acceptance at all? She wiped her tears, smearing mascara across her cheek. What am I supposed to do now? The wedding is in 5 weeks. Everything's arranged. People are expecting. What do you want? I asked, cutting through her spiral of anxiety. Not what Diane wants, not what Brandon expects, not what their social circle demands. What does Olivia Wilson want for her wedding day? She looked at me blankly, as if the question made no sense. I want everyone to be happy. Everyone except yourself, it seems. I sighed, feeling suddenly exhausted by the conversation. Olivia, I can't tell you what to do. You're an adult, and these are your choices to make. But I want you to understand that I won't be putting my life on hold anymore, waiting for crumbs of your attention or appreciation. What does that mean? She asked, a note of panic entering her voice. It means I'm becoming a partner at Hartman & Associates next month. It means I'm taking art classes and making new friends and volunteering at the church. It means I'm building a life that doesn't revolve around you and your needs. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Partner? But you always said you didn't want that responsibility, that you needed flexibility for you. I finished. Yes, but circumstances have changed, and so have my priorities. She was silent for a long moment, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. You seem different. I am different, or perhaps I'm finally becoming who I always was beneath the role of Olivia's mom. She flinched slightly at that. So, where does that leave us? Are you saying you don't want to be in my life anymore? No, Olivia. I'm saying I won't be in your life on the terms you've recently established. I won't be the convenient ATM who's kept at arm's length until you need something. I won't be the mother who's hidden away when she doesn't fit the image you want to project. I deserve better than that, and frankly, so do you. She stood abruptly, gathering her purse. I should go. I need to. Think about things. I nodded, rising as well. That would be a good start. At the door, she paused, turning back with uncertainty in her eyes. Will you at least think about coming to the wedding? Not as mother of the bride, just as a guest? The request was so painfully inadequate, so emblematic of the dynamic I was trying to change, that I almost laughed. No, Olivia, I won't be attending your wedding in any capacity. Not because I'm punishing you, but because I respect myself too much to accept such a diminished place in your life. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, processing the encounter. There was pain, yes, but also a strange sense of liberation. For perhaps the first time, I had stated my needs and boundaries clearly without backing down, without prioritizing Olivia's feelings over my own. It felt both foreign and right. The rest of the week unfolded in a series of small but significant changes. I redecorated my home office, converting it from a cluttered storage space for Olivia's childhood mementos into a proper workspace with a desk overlooking the garden. I attended my second art class, this time bringing a canvas from home. An unfinished landscape I'd abandoned when Olivia started kindergarten, nearly 22 years ago. I participated in the church's volunteer orientation, signing up to lead a 6-week financial literacy workshop for single parents. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, like color returning to a faded photograph. There were moments of doubt, of course, Late at night, when the house felt too quiet, or when a memory of Olivia as a child would surface unexpectedly. But even in those moments, I held firm to my new boundaries, reminding myself that true love didn't require self-erasure. On Friday evening, my sister Patty called to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked without preamble. "Michael told me Olivia came to see you at work." "I'm doing surprisingly well," I answered, curled up on my newly reupholstered living room sofa with a glass of wine. It was hard seeing her, but I held my ground. "Good," Patty said firmly. "And the partnership announcement? Still happening next week?" "Yes, Jonathan's made all the arrangements. There's going to be a small reception after the staff meeting. You should come." "Try keeping me away," she laughed. "My little sister, the accounting partner. Mom and Dad would have been so proud." The mention of our parents, both gone for over a decade now, brought a wistful smile to my face. I think they would have been, though Dad might have wondered what took me so long. "They raised us to be independent women," Patty said softly. "I think they'd understand why you put your career on hold for Olivia, but I also think they'd be cheering you on now, watching you reclaim your power." After we hung up, I sat with that thought for a while. My parents had indeed valued independence, teaching both Patty and me to stand on our own feet, to pursue education and career with the same determination as the boys in our neighborhood. Somewhere along the way, after Robert left, I'd lost sight of that foundation. I'd poured everything into ensuring Olivia never felt the absence of her father, to the point of sacrificing my own independence, my own dreams. The irony didn't escape me. In trying to give Olivia everything, I had inadvertently taught her that my needs, my identity, were secondary. Always negotiable, always expendable. That night, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I called Harold Freeman, the manager at Pine Ridge Community Bank, and made an appointment to discuss refinancing options for my home. The second mortgage I'd taken out for Olivia's college education had been a financial burden for years, limiting my ability to save for retirement or pursue my own dreams. With my upcoming salary increase and partnership profit sharing, I could potentially consolidate and refinance under much more favorable terms. It was time to put my financial house in order, to secure my own future rather than pouring every spare dollar into Olivia's. The thought brought not guilt, but a profound sense of rightness, of long overdue self-care. The weekend brought another unexpected development. On Saturday morning, as I was sorting through old clothes to donate, another step in reclaiming my space, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brandon Hughes standing awkwardly on my porch, hands shoved in the pockets of his expensive khakis. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "I was hoping we could talk. May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. It occurred to me that in all the months Olivia had been dating and then engaged to Brandon, we'd barely exchanged more than polite small talk. He was handsome in the generic way of privileged young men, tall, athletic, with carefully styled hair and the confident posture of someone who's never had to question his place in the world. "Can I offer you something to drink?" I asked, leading him to the living room. "Coffee? Water?" "No, thank you," he replied, perching on the edge of the sofa as if afraid to get too comfortable. "I won't take much of your time." I settled in the armchair across from him, waiting expectantly. He cleared his throat, clearly nervous. "I wanted to apologize," he finally said, meeting my eyes briefly before looking away, "for how everything has been handled with the wedding. Olivia told me what really happened, about you being asked not to come. I want you to know I had no idea." His apparent sincerity took me by surprise. "Your mother didn't discuss it with you?" He shook his head, a flash of something like embarrassment crossing his features. "My mother tends to manage things without consulting me, especially when it comes to social matters." "And Olivia didn't mention it either?" Not until yesterday, after she came to see you. She was upset, crying. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. She finally told me everything, how you paid for Westfield, how she agreed to exclude you from the wedding to please my mother. I was shocked, Mrs. Wilson, truly. I studied him carefully, trying to reconcile this apparently decent young man with the family dynamics that had caused me so much pain. What did you say when she told you? He looked genuinely distressed. I told her it was wrong, that you should be at our wedding, that you should be honored as her mother. He paused, swallowing hard. I even called off the engagement. You what? That was the last thing I had expected to hear. I broke up with Olivia, he said quietly. Or at least I tried to. I told her I couldn't marry someone who would treat her own mother that way, who would be so easily influenced by my family's prejudices. I was momentarily speechless, struggling to process this revelation. That seems like an extreme reaction. Brandon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mrs. Wilson, you need to understand something about me. My family's wealth and status look impressive from the outside, but growing up in that household, it wasn't always pleasant. My mother's constant social climbing, her obsession with appearances, her manipulation. I've spent my whole life trying to break free of it. Yet you brought Olivia right into that dynamic, I pointed out. He winced. I know. I thought she was different. Strong enough to resist the pressure, to help me create something healthier than what I grew up with. But watching her change, seeing her adopt my mother's values so easily, he shook his head sadly. It made me question everything about our relationship. So you ended it, I said, still trying to make sense of his story. Then why are you here? Because she convinced me to reconsider, he admitted. She promised things would be different, that she'd make it right with you. She wants to postpone the wedding, start over with the planning. She wants you involved every step of the way. I felt a complex mix of emotions, hope that Olivia was reconsidering her choices, skepticism about her motives, wariness about being drawn back into the drama. And what do you want, Brandon? He seemed surprised by the question. I want to marry the woman I fell in love with, the kind, independent Olivia who cared about people more than appearances, not the person she's become under my mother's influence. Have you considered that perhaps the problem isn't just your mother's influence, but the fundamental values you're bringing into this marriage? The expectations that come with your family's wealth and status? He nodded slowly. That's exactly why I think postponing is the right choice. We need time to figure out what we really want, what kind of life we're building together. He hesitated, then added, and I need to establish firmer boundaries with my mother. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy for this young man, caught between his domineering mother and his conflicted fiancé. But I also recognized the danger of being pulled back into their orbit, of having my newly established boundaries tested so soon. I appreciate your coming here, Brandon, and I'm glad you're encouraging Olivia to reconsider her choices. But my position hasn't changed. I won't be treated as an afterthought in my daughter's life, nor will I fund a wedding where I'm not fully welcome. I understand, he said, rising to leave. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in the Hughes family shares my mother's perspectives, and I hope that, with time, we can build a better relationship. After he left, I sat for a long while processing the unexpected visit. Was this a genuine olive branch or another manipulation? Was Olivia truly having a change of heart, or was she simply reacting to the threat of losing Brandon? And most importantly, what did I want from this situation? The answer came to me with surprising clarity. I wanted consistency. I wanted my boundaries to be respected, not just when they were convenient, but even, especially, when they were challenged. I wanted the space and time to continue rebuilding my life, rediscovering my identity beyond motherhood. With that realization, I made another decision. I wouldn't reach out to Olivia, wouldn't suggest a reconciliation or offer to help with new wedding plans. If she wanted to repair our relationship, she would need to do the work, to demonstrate through consistent actions, not just convenient words, that she valued me as a person, not just as a resource. In the meantime, I had a life to build. My life, on my terms, after decades of putting it on hold. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt genuinely excited about what that life might hold. The following Tuesday brought the official announcement of my partnership at Hartman & Associates. Jonathan had arranged a small reception in the conference room, champagne, catered hors d'oeuvres, and a tasteful cake decorated with congratulatory messages. The entire staff gathered to celebrate, along with several key clients Jonathan had personally invited. Patty arrived early, bringing a bouquet of vibrant sunflowers and squeezing my hand tightly as we entered the room together. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Look at what you've accomplished." The reception was more emotional than I'd anticipated. Jonathan's speech about my years of dedication, attention to detail, and commitment to client service brought unexpected tears to my eyes. When he handed me the framed partnership agreement, the room erupted in applause, and I found myself surrounded by colleagues offering genuine congratulations. Harold Freeman from Pine Ridge Community Bank shook my hand vigorously. "Jonathan tells me this has been in the works for years. I'm glad to see you finally taking the step, Eleanor. Our bank has always valued our relationship with Hartman, and knowing you'll be guiding the firm's future only strengthens that confidence." "Thank you, Harold. That means a great deal," I replied, thinking of our upcoming meeting to discuss refinancing my mortgage. This partnership wasn't just a professional accomplishment. It was the key to securing my financial independence, to building a future that belonged wholly to me. As I mingled with guests, I caught sight of Marjorie. Taylor, my longtime friend and former teacher, deep in conversation with Ruth Simmons near the dessert table. Marjorie waved me over, embracing me warmly. "Partner at last. I always knew you had it in you," she beamed, her silver hair shimmering under the conference room lights. "Ruth's been telling me about your return to painting as well. You're on quite a roll, Eleanor." "It feels like making up for lost time," I admitted, but in the best possible way. Ruth patted my arm. "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be, dear." The celebration was winding down when I noticed a commotion at the reception area outside the conference room. I caught a glimpse of familiar blonde hair, a raised voice, and my assistant's concerned face. Excusing myself from a conversation with a client, I moved toward the doorway, where Olivia stood arguing with my assistant, Jenny. "Don't care if there's a private event. I need to see my mother now," Olivia was insisting, her voice carrying across the hushed office. "Olivia?" I said quietly, stepping into the hallway. "This isn't the time or place." She whirled to face me, her expression a complex mix of emotions: frustration, determination, and something that might have been remorse. "Mom, we need to talk. It's important." "I'm in the middle of a work event," I replied, gesturing toward the conference room where curious colleagues were trying not to stare. "Can this wait until later?" "No, it can't." She thrust a thick envelope toward me. "Brandon and I have decided to postpone the wedding. We've sent out notifications to all the guests, explaining that we need time to reconsider our plans. I wanted you to have yours in person." I took the envelope automatically, noting the expensive cream-colored paper and Olivia's elegant handwriting on the front. "Thank you, but this could have waited." "There's more," she said, lowering her voice. "We broke the news to Diane last night. She didn't take it well. She's been calling everyone, telling them it's your fault, that you manipulated me and Brandon into canceling because you were jealous." I felt a flash of anger. And you came here to warn me? I came to apologize, she said, her voice cracking slightly. And to ask if we can talk. Really talk. About everything. I studied my daughter's face, the genuine distress in her eyes, the tension in her posture, and felt the familiar maternal instinct to comfort her warring with my new commitment to maintaining boundaries. I appreciate you coming by, Olivia, but today is about celebrating my partnership. I've worked towards this for years, and I'd like to focus on that right now. Her eyes widened in surprise. Partnership? You actually did it? You're becoming partner. The hint of disbelief in her voice stung. Yes, the announcement was made this morning. Jonathan's been planning to scale back for some time. Wow, Mom. Congratulations. She seemed genuinely thrown off balance by this news, as if she'd never considered that my professional life had continued to evolve during our estrangement. Thank you, I said simply. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should get back to my guests. Of course, she murmured, taking a step back. But can we talk later? Please? Maybe dinner this weekend? I considered her request, weighing my desire to protect my emotional well-being against the possibility of genuine reconciliation. Saturday evening, I finally said. You can come to the house at 6. We can talk then. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I'll be there. As she turned to leave, Patty emerged from the conference room, her protective instincts clearly on high alert. Everything okay out here? She asked, eyeing Olivia with obvious suspicion. Everything's fine, I assured her. Olivia was just leaving. Patty waited until Olivia had disappeared down the hallway before turning to me. What did she want? To tell me they've postponed the wedding, I said, holding up the envelope, and to ask if we could talk. And you said? Saturday dinner, at my house. Patty frowned. Are you sure that's wise, after everything she's put you through? I sighed, tucking the envelope into my purse. I don't know if it's wise, Patty, but she's still my daughter, and if there's a chance for genuine reconciliation, I think I owe it to both of us to hear her out. Just promise me you'll keep those boundaries firm, she said, squeezing my arm. Don't let her guilt you into financing wedding 2. 0 or whatever they're planning next. I smiled at my sister's bluntness. I promise. This is about rebuilding our relationship, not my checkbook. And speaking of finances, I've got a meeting with Harold tomorrow about refinancing the house. Good. Patty nodded approvingly. It's about time you put your financial security first. We returned to the reception where Jonathan was preparing to make a toast to the firm's future. But as I raised my champagne glass with my colleagues, a small part of my mind remained fixed on Saturday's upcoming conversation with Olivia. Despite my newfound resolve, despite all the progress I'd made in reclaiming my life, a part of me still hoped for reconciliation, not a return to our old, unhealthy dynamic, but perhaps the beginning of something new, something balanced. On Thursday evening, I attended my 3rd art class at Pine Ridge Creative Corner. The week's assignment was a still life, an arrangement of fruit, vintage bottles, and draped fabric. As I mixed colors on my palette, carefully building layers of pigment on canvas, Carolyn leaned over to inspect my work. You've definitely done this before, she remarked. There's confidence in your brushwork that beginners never have. I smiled, adding a highlight to the curve of an apple. I studied art in college, actually, before I switched to accounting for the job security. The practical choice, she nodded. I almost went into nursing for the same reason. But sometimes our creative souls refuse to be silenced, don't they? They certainly do, I agreed, thinking of the strange full-circle journey that had brought me back to painting after all these years. After class, Carolyn and several other women invited me to join them for drinks at the Lakeside Bistro. We go every Thursday, explained Grace, a retired English teacher with a passion for abstract expressionism. Sort of an unofficial art therapy session. I found myself agreeing readily, enjoying the easy camaraderie of these women I barely knew. At the bistro, conversation flowed as freely as the wine, discussions about technique and inspiration giving way to more personal sharing, about relationships, work challenges, and life transitions. "So, Eleanor," asked Maria, a nurse with a talent for detailed botanical paintings, "what brought you back to art after so long away?" I hesitated, unsure how much of my personal drama to share with these new acquaintances. "Life changes," I finally said. "My daughter's getting married, or was, they've postponed now. And I realized I'd spent so many years focused entirely on her needs that I'd lost touch with parts of myself that were important." Heads nodded around the table in understanding. "The empty nest reckoning," said Grace. "I went through it when my twins left for college. Suddenly, all that energy I'd been pouring into them needed somewhere to go." "Exactly," I agreed. "Plus, some complicated family dynamics that forced me to reassess my priorities." "Complicated family dynamics is practically Pine Ridge's motto," laughed Carolyn. "This town runs on gossip disguised as concern." As if summoned by her words, the bistro door opened, and Diane Hughes swept in with two elegantly dressed women I recognized as prominent members of her social circle. She didn't notice our table at first, absorbed in whatever she was saying to her companions. But as they were led to a nearby booth, her gaze swept across the room and landed directly on me. For a moment, our eyes locked. Her expression hardened, and she leaned closer to her friends, speaking in a low voice that didn't quite carry to our table, but their glances in my direction made it clear I was the topic of discussion. "Someone you know?" Carolyn asked, following my gaze. "My almost mother-in-law," I said quietly, "though that status is currently in question since they've postponed the wedding." "Ah, the infamous Diane Hughes," Carolyn nodded. "Interior design clients don't come much more demanding than her. Everything must be perfect, and everyone must know exactly how much it cost." The table laughed, and I felt a wave of gratitude for these women who had no stake in the drama, but were offering me the simple gift of normalcy and friendship. Throughout dinner, I was acutely aware of Diane's presence, though I deliberately kept my back to her table. My new friends seemed to sense my discomfort and kept the conversation flowing, sharing stories of their own difficult in-laws and family conflicts. We were finishing our dessert when I felt a presence beside our table. Looking up, I found Diane Hughes standing there, a tight smile fixed on her perfectly made-up face. "Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard at nearby. "Tables. What a surprise to see you out enjoying yourself. I would have thought you'd be home counting the money you saved by destroying my son's wedding." A hush fell over our table. Carolyn stiffened beside me, while the other women exchanged uncomfortable glances. I set down my fork deliberately, turning to face Diane. "Good evening, Diane. I'm surprised to see you as well. I thought you'd be busy calling everyone in Pine Ridge to blame me for Olivia and Brandon's decision to postpone." Her smile grew colder. "Is that what Olivia told you? That it was a mutual decision? How convenient for her conscience." She glanced around at my companions. "You should know the kind of woman you're dining with, ladies. She manipulated her own daughter into calling off her wedding out of pure selfishness." I felt anger rising in my chest, but forced myself to remain calm. "Diane, this isn't the place for this conversation. My friends and I are having a private dinner." "Friends?" she scoffed. "You've known these women for what, 5 minutes? Don't pretend you suddenly have a social life, Eleanor. We both know you've spent the last 20 years with no identity, outside being Olivia's mother, and you couldn't even manage that properly." The cruelty of her words hit like a physical blow. Before I could respond, Carolyn rose to her feet, drawing herself up to her full height. I'm sorry, but I don't believe we've been introduced, she said, her tone deceptively pleasant. I'm Carolyn Delaney. I've designed interiors for half the homes in Harbor View, including the Richardsons next door to you. And while I've only known Eleanor for a short time, I can tell you she has more class in her little finger than you're displaying with this entire performance. Diane blinked, clearly taken aback by Carolyn's intervention. This is a private matter that you chose to make public by approaching our table and creating a scene, Grace interjected, her English teacher authority evident in her tone. Rather poor form, wouldn't you say? Maria leaned forward, adding quietly, and just so you know, we've all heard Eleanor's side of the story. If your goal was to damage her reputation, you're about 3 drinks too late. Diane's face flushed, with anger and embarrassment. Her gaze swept across our table, lingering on my calm expression, before she turned on her heel without another word and marched back to her own booth. Well, said Carolyn, settling back into her seat. That was bracing. I'm so sorry, I began, mortified that my personal drama had spilled over into what had been a lovely evening. Don't you dare apologize, Grace said firmly. That woman was completely out of line. And now we're definitely friends, added Maria with a smile. Nothing bonds a group faster than facing down a common enemy. Their support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you, I said simply. It means more than you know. We finished our dessert and paid the bill, deliberately taking our time, unwilling to let Diane think she'd driven us away. As we finally rose to leave, I caught sight of the bistro's owner, Sophia Rossi, standing by the bar. She gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement, and I realized she had been watching the situation, ready to intervene if necessary. Outside in the cool evening air, we said our goodbyes with promises to meet again next week. Carolyn lingered as the others departed, her expression concerned. Are you all right to drive home? She asked. That was a pretty intense confrontation. I'm fine, I assured her. Actually, I feel lighter somehow, as if Diane's public attack freed me from something. Carolyn smiled knowingly. The fear of what people might think if they knew. The whole story? I've been there. Sometimes having everything out in the open is a relief, even when it's messy. Exactly, I nodded. And thank you again for standing up for me. You barely know me. I know enough, she said simply. And women need to have each other's backs. Text me when you're home safe? I promised I would, touched by her concern. As I drove through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, I reflected on the evening's events. Diane's public confrontation had been unpleasant, even painful. But it had also clarified something important. I was no longer alone in this town. I had people in my corner now, people who valued me for myself, not just as Olivia's mother or a convenient source of financial support. Friday morning brought an unexpected development. As I prepared for my meeting with Harold Freeman about refinancing my mortgage, my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Eleanor Wilson speaking, I answered professionally. Mrs. Wilson, this is Gregory Hughes. Brandon's father's voice was instantly recognizable, though we'd spoken only a handful of times. I was hoping we might meet to discuss recent developments. I felt a flutter of anxiety. Gregory Hughes was a formidable figure in regional finance, known for his shrewd business dealings and influential connections. What did you have in mind, Mr. Hughes? Lunch, perhaps? He suggested. The Lakeside Bistro at noon? I believe you're familiar with it. The hint of condescension in his tone wasn't lost on me. I have a meeting at the bank this morning, but I could meet you at 1:30. That will suffice, he replied. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. After hanging up, I called Patty immediately. Gregory Hughes wants to have lunch with me today. Should I be worried? Absolutely, she responded without hesitation. The Hughes family doesn't make social calls without an agenda. What do you think he wants? Probably to convince me to encourage Olivia and Brandon to proceed with the wedding, I speculated. Or to blame me for the postponement, like Diane's been doing. Be careful, Ellie, Patty warned. Men like Gregory Hughes are used to getting their way. Don't let him intimidate you. I won't, I promised, though my stomach knotted with apprehension. The meeting with Harold Freeman went smoothly. With my new partnership and increased income, refinancing the second mortgage proved straightforward. Harold reviewed my financial situation with professional thoroughness, then sat back with a satisfied smile. You're in an excellent position, Eleanor, he confirmed. With the terms we've discussed, you could be completely free of mortgage debt in 12 years instead of 22, and your monthly payments will decrease by nearly $600. That's even better than I'd hoped, I admitted, relief washing over me. Your credit has always been impeccable, he noted. And now with the partnership, your debt-to-income ratio is quite favorable. You've worked hard to get here. As I left the bank, the weight of financial worry lifted considerably from my shoulders. The refinancing wasn't just about saving money, it was about securing my independence, ensuring that my future wasn't mortgaged to Olivia's needs and wants. Gregory Hughes was already seated when I arrived at the Lakeside Bistro, occupying a corner table that afforded privacy while still allowing him to survey the room. He rose as I approached, his handshake firm and impersonal. Mrs. Wilson, thank you for meeting me, he said, gesturing for me to take the seat across from him. I've taken the liberty of ordering a bottle of Sancerre. I hope that meets with your approval. That's fine, thank you, I replied, settling into my chair and placing my napkin in my lap with deliberate care. I would not be rushed or flustered by his practiced corporate demeanor. A server appeared immediately to pour the wine and take our orders. Gregory waited until she had retreated before leaning forward slightly, his expression serious. I'll come straight to the point, Mrs. Wilson. This situation with the wedding has gotten out of hand. Diane is upset, Brandon is conflicted, and from what I understand, your relationship with Olivia is strained at best. I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. Mr. Hughes, with all due respect, the situation began when your wife and Olivia decided I shouldn't attend my own daughter's wedding. Everything that's happened since has stemmed from that decision. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. I understand there was a misunderstanding about your role in the ceremony. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I corrected firmly. It was a deliberate exclusion, followed by shock and outrage when I withdrew my financial support for an event I wasn't welcome to attend. Gregory studied me with newfound interest, as if recalibrating his assessment. You're more direct than I expected, Mrs. Wilson. Recent events have clarified my priorities, I replied, one of which is being treated with basic respect. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Then let me be equally direct. Brandon and Olivia postponing the wedding has created significant complications, social, financial, and personal. I believe it would be in everyone's best interest if they proceeded as planned, albeit with a new venue and perhaps some adjustments to the guest list. Including me as mother of the bride? I asked pointedly. Of course, he said smoothly. That was an unfortunate suggestion on Diane's part. She can be overzealous about maintaining certain appearances. I set down my wine glass, meeting his gaze directly. Mr. Hughes, I need to be very clear about something. I will not be using my influence with Olivia to encourage this wedding to proceed on anyone's timetable but hers and Brandon's. If they've decided they need time to reconsider, that's their decision to make. Even if reconsidering leads to cancellation? He asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Brandon has invested significantly in their future together. The apartment. In New York, the engagement ring, various financial commitments. Are you suggesting Olivia owes him marriage because of those investments? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Because that sounds uncomfortably transactional. Gregory frowned. I'm merely pointing out that there are practical considerations beyond emotion. There certainly are, I agreed. Like whether two people are truly compatible, whether they share fundamental values, whether they're marrying for the right reasons. Those seem like important practical considerations to me. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our lunch. As we ate, Gregory shifted to more neutral topics: my work at Hartman & Associates, the economic outlook for Pine Ridge, his own business interests. But I remained on guard, sensing that he hadn't yet revealed his true purpose in arranging this meeting. As we finished our main course, he leaned back in his chair, swirling the last of his wine thoughtfully. I understand you paid a substantial deposit for Westfield Estate. And there it was, the real reason for lunch. I did, I confirmed. Nearly my entire savings at the time. That represents a significant financial loss, he observed, one that could perhaps be mitigated. I raised an eyebrow. How so? I have some influence with the management at Westfield, he said casually. If the wedding were to proceed on the original date, I believe I could persuade them to honor your deposit despite the cancellation. The offer was tempting. $45,000 was no small sum, even with my improved financial situation. But I recognized the implicit bargain. My influence for his, a transaction that would once again reduce my relationship with Olivia to a financial equation. That's a generous offer, I said carefully. But I've already made peace with that loss. It was the price of standing up for myself, of recognizing my own worth beyond what I could provide financially. Gregory's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Wilson, I'm trying to offer you a way to recover a substantial sum of money. Most people would be grateful for such an opportunity. Most people haven't spent decades being valued primarily for their checkbook, I replied evenly. The deposit is gone. I've accepted that. What I'm not willing to accept is being manipulated back into a dynamic where my worth is measured by what I can financially contribute to Olivia's life. He studied me for a long moment, then signaled for the check. You're either remarkably principled or remarkably foolish, Mrs. Wilson. I'm not entirely sure which. Perhaps both, I conceded with a small smile. But I'm also remarkably clear about my boundaries now, which is progress I don't intend to surrender. As we prepared to leave, Gregory hesitated, then said, Whatever you may think of Diane's behavior, which I acknowledge has been less than tactful, she believes she's acting in Brandon's best interests. She wants him to have the kind of life she believes he deserves. I understand that, I said softly. I wanted the same for Olivia. The difference is that I've finally realized my daughter deserves to make her own choices, even if they're different from what I would choose for her. And she deserves a mother who models self-respect, not self-sacrifice to the point of erasure. Something flickered in Gregory's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or reluctant respect. You've given me something to think about, Mrs. Wilson. Thank you for meeting with me today. As I drove back to the office, I realized that for the first time, I had engaged with the Hughes family as an equal, not as the grateful, accommodating mother of the bride, desperate for their acceptance, but as a woman secure in her own worth and clear about her boundaries. It was a small victory, but a significant one. That evening, I received a text from Olivia. Still on for dinner tomorrow at 6? I can bring wine. I replied simply, Yes. No need to bring anything. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the approaching conversation with my daughter. After a week of confrontations and revelations, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened with Olivia, reconciliation, continued estrangement, or something in between, I knew I would be all right. I had rediscovered parts of myself I'd thought lost forever, built new connections, and established firm foundations for my future. For perhaps the first time in decades, my sense of self wasn't entirely tied to my identity as Olivia's mother. I fell asleep easily, dreaming of sunlit art studios and quiet evenings by the sea. Saturday dawned clear and crisp, a perfect early spring day. I spent the morning at the farmer's market, selecting fresh ingredients for dinner: local asparagus, wild-caught salmon, tiny new potatoes. I wasn't trying to impress Olivia, but I took pleasure in preparing a meal that reflected care and attention. In the afternoon, I worked in my garden, clearing winter debris and turning the soil in preparation for planting. The physical labor was satisfying, grounding me in the present moment, preventing anxious speculation about the evening ahead. At 5:30, I showered and changed into comfortable clothes, not the formal attire I might once have chosen for an important conversation with Olivia, but not casual enough to suggest indifference. I wanted to present myself authentically, as the woman I was becoming, not the mother she expected me to be. The doorbell rang precisely at 6. I opened it to find Olivia standing on the porch, a small bouquet of spring flowers in her hands, despite my text saying she needn't bring anything. She looked tired, I noticed, shadows under her eyes, her usual perfect appearance slightly frayed at the edges. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice soft with uncertainty. "These are for you." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the flowers and stepping aside to let her enter. "They're lovely." We stood awkwardly in the entryway for a moment, neither quite sure how to proceed. This was new territory for both of us, meeting as adults with a rift between us, without the easy patterns of our previous relationship to fall back on. "Something smells good," Olivia offered, breaking the silence. "Salmon with dill sauce," I said, leading her toward the kitchen. "Would you like a glass of wine before dinner?" "Please," she nodded, following me. As we entered the kitchen, she paused, looking around with surprise. "You've been redecorating." The kitchen had indeed undergone a transformation in recent weeks. New paint in a warm terracotta, open shelving displaying my grandmother's blue and white pottery, a small bistro table by the window where my cluttered desk had once stood. "Just a few changes," I acknowledged, pouring us each a glass of Pinot Grigio, making the space more functional for how I live now. Olivia accepted the wine, her eyes still scanning the room. "It looks good. More. You, somehow." It was an oddly perceptive comment from someone who'd been so oblivious to my needs and feelings in recent months. "Thank you," I said simply. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. Should we sit in the living room until then?" She nodded, following me through to the other room, which had also seen subtle changes: new throw pillows, rearranged furniture, the walls now adorned with several of my paintings, including the one I'd recently completed in class. "Did you paint those?" Olivia asked, gesturing toward the artwork. "Yes," I confirmed. "I've started taking classes again at Pine Ridge Creative Corner." "I didn't know you could paint," she said, a note of confusion in her voice. "I mean, I guess I knew you studied art in college, but I've never seen you actually do it." "There are probably a lot of things about me you don't know," I said gently, settling into an armchair. "I set aside many parts of myself when I became a single mother. It seemed necessary at the time." Olivia perched on the edge of the sofa, clutching her wine glass like a lifeline. "Is that why you're so angry with me? Because you gave up things for me?" I considered her question carefully. "I'm not angry with you for the sacrifices I chose to make, Olivia. I'm hurt by how easily you discarded me when I no longer served your purposes. I'm disappointed by how quickly you adopted values that diminish, rather than honor the journey we've taken together." She stared into her wine, shoulders slumping. "I messed up, really badly. I know that now." "Yes," I agreed, not rushing to ease her discomfort. "You did." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't even recognize myself anymore, Mom. These past few months, it's like I've been playing a role. Diane's version of the perfect daughter-in-law, Brandon's socially acceptable fiancé. I lost myself somewhere along the way. That happens? Sometimes. I said, feeling a flicker of empathy beneath my protective caution. Especially when we desperately want to belong somewhere, to be accepted by people whose approval seems important. She looked up, wiping away a tear. How did you— No, that's how I felt. Because I've felt it too, I admitted. After your father left, when I was trying to maintain appearances, to prove I could do it all on my own. It's exhausting, isn't it? Constantly measuring yourself against someone else's standards. She nodded, a fresh tear spilling down her cheek. I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For letting Diane dictate our wedding plans. For not standing up for you. For telling you not to come. It was cruel and ungrateful and completely wrong. Her apology seemed genuine, her distress real. But I'd spent too many years prioritizing Olivia's feelings over my own to rush into easy forgiveness now. Why did you do it? I asked quietly. Why was Diane's approval so important that you were willing to hurt me to secure it? Olivia set down her wine glass, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. I thought if I could just fit perfectly into their world, all the insecurities I've always felt would finally go away. The Hughes family has everything: money, connections, status. Being accepted by them felt like proof that I was good enough, that I belonged. Good enough for what, Olivia? For whom? For Brandon, she whispered. For myself. For— She hesitated, then continued in a voice so low I could barely hear it. For Dad. Understanding dawned, bringing with it a wave of sadness. Of course. Robert's abandonment had left wounds far deeper than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge, creating in Olivia a desperate need for validation that no amount of my love and support could fully heal. Oh, sweetheart, I sighed. Your father's choices were never about your worth. Never. And neither are the Hughes family's judgments. I know that, she said, fresh tears falling. Logically, I know that. But emotionally? It's like there's this empty space inside me that I keep trying to fill, with other people's approval. And when Brandon proposed, when his family welcomed me in their way, conditionally, judgmentally, but still welcomed me, it felt like finally filling that hole. Until they made you choose between them and me, I observed. She nodded miserably. And I made the wrong choice. The moment the words left my mouth at the coffee shop, I knew it was wrong. But I couldn't take it back, couldn't admit how badly I'd betrayed you, couldn't face what that said about me as a person. The timer in the kitchen beeped, signaling that dinner was ready. Let's continue this conversation at the table, I suggested, rising from my chair. As we moved through to the dining room, Olivia paused, noticing more changes. The antique sideboard I'd recently refinished, the new curtains, the absence of the formal china cabinet that had dominated the room. For years. You really have been redecorating, she observed as I served the meal. Reclaiming, I corrected, making this house reflect who I am now, not just the roles I've played. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the delicate flavors of the salmon, and spring vegetables a counterpoint to the emotional heaviness between us. Brandon still wants to get married, Olivia said eventually. But he wants us to do premarital counseling first, to make sure we're on the same page about our values and priorities. That sounds wise, I acknowledged. What do you want? She looked startled by the question. What do I want? Yes, Olivia. Not what Brandon wants, not what Diane expects, not what would look good to others. What do you, Olivia Wilson, truly want for your life? She faltered, setting down her fork. I don't think anyone's asked me that in a long time. Maybe not since I was in college. Perhaps it's time to start asking yourself, I suggested gently. She nodded slowly. I think I want to find out who I really am when I'm not trying to please everyone else. And I want to repair our relationship, Mom. I miss who we used to be together. I took a sip of water, considering my response carefully. I miss aspects of our relationship too, Olivia, but I can't and won't go back to how things were. The dynamic wasn't healthy for either of us. What do you mean? She asked, brow furrowing. I mean that I enabled patterns that weren't good for you or for me. I prioritized your needs and wants to the exclusion of my own. I taught you, through my actions, that my role was to give and your role was to take. That's not a healthy foundation for any relationship. In the months that followed our dinner conversation, Olivia and I established a new relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than dependence. We began with small steps, weekly phone calls that didn't revolve around crises or requests for help, occasional lunches where we discussed everything from books to politics to her ongoing therapy sessions. She started asking me questions about my life, showing genuine interest in my partnership at the firm, my painting classes, my growing circle of friends. It was unfamiliar territory for both of us, but in that unfamiliarity, we discovered something valuable, the potential for a healthier connection as two adult women who shared history but were no longer defined solely by it. Brandon and Olivia continued their premarital counseling, working through the complex dynamics that had shaped their relationship. To my surprise, Gregory Hughes reached out to me again, not to negotiate or persuade, but to express a grudging respect for the stand I had taken. Over coffee at the morning brew, he admitted that his own marriage had suffered from Diane's relentless social climbing, her determination to maintain appearances at any cost. She wasn't always like this, he confided, stirring his black coffee absently. When we first met, Diane was warm, genuine, passionate about her teaching career. Somewhere along the way, keeping up with the right people became more important than being the right person. I found myself feeling an unexpected compassion for both of them, caught in patterns of their own making, just as I had been. It's never too late to change course, I told him, to reclaim parts of yourself you've set aside. He smiled wryly, spoken like someone who knows firsthand. 6 months after our original confrontation at the morning brew, Olivia invited me to dinner at her apartment in New York. When I arrived, I found not the sleek, impersonal space I'd expected, decorated to Diane's exacting standards, but a warm, eclectic home that reflected Olivia's emerging sense of self. Bright textiles, vintage furniture pieces, walls adorned with local artwork, none of it coordinated to perfection, all of it uniquely hers. I've been making some changes, she explained as she took my coat. Brandon's been supportive, actually. He says it feels more like a home and less like a furniture showroom. Over a simple meal she'd prepared herself, a far cry from the catered dinners she'd once insisted on, Olivia shared her news. We've set a new wedding date, she said, watching my reaction carefully. Next spring. Something small at the Pines Resort's new pavilion. Just family and close friends. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. That sounds lovely. We'd like you to be there, she continued, her voice growing softer. Not just as a guest, but as mother of the bride. Fully acknowledged, fully included, that is, if you want to be. I considered her offer, searching my heart for the honest response. I'd like that, I finally said, but I need you to understand something important, Olivia. I won't be paying for this wedding. Not because I don't support your marriage, if that's what you truly want, but because I believe you and Brandon need to build your life together on your own terms, not mine. To my relief, she nodded without hesitation. We've already discussed that. We're paying for everything ourselves, a budget we can actually afford, not one designed to impress Diane's social circle. And speaking of Diane, she hesitated, then continued. She's not involved in the planning this time. Brandon was very clear with her about boundaries. That couldn't have been easy for either of them, I observed. It wasn't, Olivia confirmed. There were tears, accusations, the whole dramatic production. But something interesting happened afterward. Gregory called Brandon and said he was proud of him for standing his ground. I think there might be some healing happening in their family, too. As spring approached, I found myself contemplating another significant change. My refinanced mortgage, combined with my partnership income, had created a financial stability I'd never expected to enjoy. During a weekend art retreat on the coast, I fell in love with a small cottage, ocean views, a light-filled studio space, a garden that tumbled with wildflowers. On impulse, I made an offer, envisioning it as a weekend retreat, perhaps eventually a retirement home. When the offer was accepted, I invited Patty to drive down with me for the inspection. Standing on the weathered deck, watching waves crash against the shore, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of having finally claimed a piece of the world that was wholly mine, chosen not for its practicality or proximity to Olivia's needs, but for the joy it brought to my soul. "It's perfect, Ellie," Patty said, squeezing my hand. "Mom and Dad would be so proud of you." The wedding itself was everything the original plan was not: intimate, genuine, focused on the commitment rather than the spectacle. Olivia asked me to help her get ready in the bridal suite, a quiet moment between mother and daughter that held more meaning than any formal recognition could have conveyed. "Are you nervous?" I asked as I fastened the delicate buttons on her dress. Simple, elegant, chosen without Diane's input. "Not about marrying Brandon," she replied, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "But I am nervous about the life we're building. It's harder than I expected, standing on our own feet, making our own way without relying on his family's connections or your support." "Harder," I acknowledged, "but ultimately more rewarding. There's a satisfaction in knowing you've earned your place in the world, not had it handed to you or purchased for you by someone else." She turned to face me, taking my hands in hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for today, but for being strong enough to let me fail, to let me face the consequences of my choices. I needed that lesson, even though it hurt us both." As I watched Olivia and Brandon exchange vows beneath the lake pavilion's soaring roof, sunlight dappling through the windows, I felt not the bittersweet ache I had expected, but a quiet contentment. This moment was exactly as it should be, a celebration of love that had been tested, of two young people who had confronted difficult truths about themselves and chosen to grow rather than retreat. At the reception, Gregory sought me out, offering a glass of champagne and an unexpected olive branch. "Diane's trying," he said, nodding toward his wife, who was making a visible effort to engage pleasantly with my sister Patty. "The counseling is helping. She's starting to understand what really matters." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "It's never too late to change course." He smiled, raising his glass slightly. "So I've been told by a very wise woman." The cottage by the sea became my sanctuary, the place where I spent increasingly long weekends painting, walking the shore, hosting small gatherings of my expanding circle of friends. Olivia and Brandon visited occasionally, their relationship with me evolving into something more balanced, more mutual in its giving and receiving. One Sunday afternoon, as we sat on the deck watching the tide roll in, Olivia surprised me with a question. "Do you ever regret it, Mom? Canceling Westfield Estate that day?" I considered her question carefully, watching a seagull dive and surface, with its catch. "No," I said finally. It was the moment I reclaimed myself, the moment I decided my worth wasn't determined by what I could give to others. It was painful, yes, but necessary. She nodded slowly. "I think it saved us both, in different ways. Saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have liked very much. Saved you from disappearing completely into my needs." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, I felt a deep gratitude for the difficult journey that had brought us to this moment. By standing firm in my own worth, by refusing to be erased from my daughter's life or diminished in my own, I had not only reclaimed myself, but had inadvertently offered Olivia her own path to authenticity. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is the courage to disappoint them, to let them face the natural consequences of their choices. Sometimes love means canceling the venue we've paid for, stepping back from the role we've always played, creating space for something new and healthier to emerge from the painful rubble of what was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.